Hello there. Thank you everybody for taking the time out of your day, whether that's morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where in the world you're joining us from. Really do appreciate your time for the next 30 to 45 minutes as we talk about cyber resilience. You're joined this morning or afternoon, again, depending where you're joining us from, Leon Israel from iluminr, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Greg Tomczyk from Valor Cybersecurity. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump into everything. And I can see we've got a few more Coloradans joining us today, which is always fantastic. What we're looking to cover off today is to talk through what we're seeing from a current cyber trends threat perspective, observations for risk and resilience leaders, whether you're, depending what area of the resilience framework you participate in within your organization. A talk through some examples of cyber microsimulations and how they can potentially address some of those trends and challenges that we're seeing unfold in the world, as well as then a little bit of Q&A throughout the session. Please don't be afraid to drop any questions into the chat or using the Q&A function. We do have some dedicated stop points as we go through the session to make sure that we are giving time to talk through them, but do feel free to drop any questions as they come into mind, and Greg and myself will look to address them as best as we can. Before we kick us off though, just a little bit about myself. So Leon Israel, Director of Operations at iluminr. For the last couple of months, I've found myself in the United States, helping our growing customer base and growing team in this part of the world. I've been in the resilience world for the better part of 8 years now. Time in general crisis management and ITDR consulting, as well as then some focused time in working with our growing iluminr customer base around the world. So everything from implementation, best practice, and ongoing engagement activities. That's where I've kind of focused my time over the years. I'd like to introduce you all to my friend and colleague, Greg, who is joining us from the Valor team.
Good morning. Thanks so much, Leon. I really appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to diving into this session. So just a little bit of background on myself. I'm a partner and CEO here at Valor Cybersecurity. I'm a former professional baseball player, have also authored a few books. Early on in my career, I was running a software development company and experienced a cyber attack. So this stuff really means something to me. I know what it feels like to go through an attack, as well as help prepare organizations. After I had that cyber attack, I decided to dive in head first into making sure leaders had the guidance that they needed to both prepare themselves, but also be able to effectively respond if and when a cyber attack came about. Since that time, it was about 2016, I've been able to help more than 150 organizations either respond or prepare for a cyber attack. We've seen kind of everything across the map that we're going to dive into today. About a year and a half ago, joined some great partners and co-founded Valor Cybersecurity, where we really help organizations bolster their cyber defenses through conducting threat assessments, making sure they have the right insurance in place, and then all the response planning that we're going to go through today. Really appreciate everyone joining us today. It's going to be a very insightful session, and looking forward to providing some insights to this active audience.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, we really do appreciate your time in terms of looking to collaborate on this sort of topic as we go further into the world. As everyone knows, the concept of cyber is very broad ranging. And I think especially in the last couple of years, COVID, work from home, varying scale, different attacks and different actors that they're coming from. It's all becoming this is not just an individual or individual teams issue. This is an organizational and an individual responsibility. So really looking forward to seeing how we can get innovative and creative in terms of addressing some of those challenges. Just to kind of recap everyone before we jump into the session, we will be exploring some key considerations for risk and resilience teams in the relation to preparedness and response activities specific to cyber threats. We do plan to jump into at least one cyber microsimulation. If we have time, we've got a second example ready to go, just so we can get the most out of today. And just something I like to point out from the iluminr perspective, these activities that we're going to be showing and talking through today are turnkey activities that can be picked up and launched with your teams in a very short time frame. What are we seeing in the world? So just to kind of give everyone a bit of a recap in terms of what we're looking to address through from a landscape perspective. Understanding key trends definitely help champions address new risks and elevate their role in terms of what do we need to be focusing our efforts on from a value perspective, engagement perspective, and what we need from a planning perspective. The 7 trends that we've identified here have come from our friends at Gartner from a 2022 top trends in cybersecurity report. And just kind of talking through these at a top level again, just so we all are working from the same perspective. Number 1, in terms of attack surface expansion. So we're seeing changes in the way that we work, move to cloud, more cloud usage across the broader organization, just not from an IT infrastructure perspective. Currently, 60% of knowledge workers are remote. So if we're looking at the move to work from home over the last couple of years in particular, and there's initial indications of around 18% of these people are not likely to return to the office. So that constant now, we don't have the ability to keep everyone within our network on-prem, within our good levels of protection that we've built up from a traditional sense. Identity systems and defense activities. In the SolarWinds breach, attackers used a supplier's privileged access to infiltrate and target a specific network. So we're seeing a lot of increased usage and adoption and introduction into the market from web-based or cloud-based security technologies. But again, simple things like who's got access to an account? Am I using my same password? Those sort of like really basic hygiene factors still being used to leverage and expose organizations as things kind of fall apart. In terms of predictions and things that are coming out our way into the future, this report predicts that by 2025, 45% of organizations worldwide will have either experienced attacks on their software supply chains, or at least a threefold, which is specifically a threefold increase from what we saw last year. In terms of those sort of activities, the other terminology I've seen, and Greg, I'm curious if you've come across this one as well, that element of it's not have I experienced, it's when will I experience, or it's just a matter of time in terms of where that relates to. And I think the latest conversation we're starting to see from an industry perspective now is that realization that it's not just about my applications and my data, but any of the tools I'm using that then might impact me, my organization, and my customers coming forward from that perspective.
Yeah, it's absolutely a supply chain aspect. Everything's connected nowadays. And if a vendor has an incident, a lot of times organizations don't hear about it unless they're impacted. So something to keep in mind going forward.
Definitely. And on that element too, different vendors consolidating their functions into single platforms. A welcome trend that would reduce complexity, cut costs, and improve efficiency, leading to a better overall security posture. So in terms of how widespread are we? The term I've picked up in the last 2 months in particular is this concept of shadow IT for those application and asset owners that are with us today. How many of your staff in your organization is going out and signing up to things without getting formal approvals and that sort of element? So really understanding what is our landscape and how what are our exposures from there. Some new things we're starting to see, cybersecurity meshing as a modern conceptual approach to security architecture that allows for a distributed enterprise to deploy and integrate security assets. And additionally, as more organizations move to a digitized world, the job of is becoming too big for a centralized specific CISO role. So just having that one leadership element, a little bit like what I mentioned earlier, this is no longer just an individual person's responsibility for the whole organization or an individual team. Everyone in the organization has a part to play into this. And just kind of rounding it out from an observation perspective, human error continues to be a massive contributor to data breaches. This is not an attack or a complaint about individuals across the world. It's just a fact of life. We're seeing that the concept of things like zero trust and just leaving things unlocked, recycling passwords, those sorts of basic elements are commonly the linchpins to some of these really big headline activities we see. So showing that traditional approaches to awareness training isn't necessarily a continuous or effective approach to these situations as time's going forward. So just kind of with that sort of landscape lens applied to what we've seen or what some generic observations have come across around the world, really want to focus on the element of how open are we with people, engagement of the whole company, and the approach to cyber resilience. And what we're actually seeing, so I suppose very much for yourself, Greg, and what you're seeing at the Valor team, what are some of the common goals that we see organizations when they're starting to build up or put focused time to improve their cyber response capabilities?
Yeah, Leon, I love that you mentioned the cultural piece, because it's really, cybersecurity is really a culture issue. And a lot of times that's where we start the process. We continue to see it, but executives see it as well. These attacks materialize in environments, and until you're impacted by it, it's hard to really relate to it. And most of the time, these attacks happen when you least expect it. Holidays, weekends, after hours. So it's not, the typical 9 to 5. It's going to hit you, right after lunch, and you come in and the whole team's ready to go. A lot of times it's when people are dispersed, they're on vacation, and they know that's an opportunity window for them to get in. So it's happening to businesses, all shapes and sizes. It's not a specific industry. Obviously, the financial world gets hit a little bit more frequently than, potentially a flower shop down the street. But when we start to talk about, common goals that organizations either come to us through or we approach them with, I think it all comes down to getting a sense of preparedness. A lot of times that starts with documentation. So making sure you have a plan in place that is tailored to your organization and has a shared responsibility across the leadership of the organization. One of the key points we always mention is you can outsource incident response when it comes to the expertise, but you own the repercussions of a cyber incident. So that makes you responsible for putting things in place, such as an incident response plan. I think the point person aspect is always key. So when it comes to communicating during a active incident or when you're testing your incident response plan, you have to have somebody that knows how to control communications across a variety of individuals. Or you have, which we've seen many times, across the table, everybody's just yelling at each other back and forth, and they're not really able to accomplish anything from that standpoint. So I think, you have to understand what skill sets you have internally. Sometimes that's the cultural aspect that we have to kind of sort out. What skill sets do people have? Has Jane served in a public relations role, but maybe now she's in HR, for example, or is there somebody who's now an executive that used to work in IT? So kind of using those skill competencies to make them right for that role when it comes to incident response, I think is always a key goal from a leadership perspective, and making sure you put people in the right seats when it comes to responding to really minimize, business disruption. I think another thing that is often kind of falls to the wayside is what vendors should be involved with cyber incident response, cyber insurance, outside general counsel, for example, technical response, the local FBI or fire departments. Some of these organizations have resources that you can use to go toward them when you need help. But you have to make sure you put that on paper or have that recognized before an incident actually happens, in order to kind of benefit from those resources.
Yeah, definitely. And you've just reminded me there too, like as we're talking about preparation, something that we're doing a lot of work with our customers on as well is that concept of engagement and awareness beyond just our compliance activities of, okay, this is our plan, this is where it lives, but really, do we all understand like our roles? Are people fit for those roles? How do we continually challenge the framework and design of those plans to make sure that we're able to deal with the unexpected situation that will happen at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night when everyone's coming home from the football, not at 11 a.m. on a Monday as we're coming out of our morning meeting. To your point, it is very much, if we look at historical timings of these sort of incidents, they are picked on when is the least amount of manpower or people power available, that we can get the most out of it and slow down that response activity. So just in terms of, I did mention this is a bit, we try to make this an engaging sort of session today. It's not just Greg and myself talking to you guys. I'm going to put a poll question out to everybody here in terms of, have you experienced a cyber attack or a severe incident? The answers that we've got for you today are yes, no, and not that I know of. So again, safe space here, just in terms of understanding where we think you and your organizations are sitting today in terms of what have we experienced versus what are we looking to do about it as it kind of comes through. So just seeing almost at 70% of people completed, a couple more.
Yeah, Leon, something to mention here as well is, a cyber incident, may not be an attack from a criminal. It could be something that happens across your systems internally that we see as a severe incident. And incident response takes those into account. It's not just when a criminal attacks the organization. So a lot of organizations that we see, they don't classify it as a cyber attack, but they have had severe incidents. So something to consider. And then the not that I know of is, I think it's an honest answer. We're all playing on the internet. We're all connected to a variety of vendors. Sometimes those vendors aren't going to tell you when they've had an attack, but it may impact you and they may just call it a system outage. But that's disruption to your business. And that's very important from an end state on making sure your business is up and running and prosperous and successful.
Completely agree. So we've seen here of those of you that are with us today, about 44% have said not that we know of, 38% yes, and 19% with a no at this point in time. Again, really appreciate everyone's time and honesty with that one. This is really interesting to see of those that we're talking with today in terms of how you think your organization's set up from there. Greg, from your experience, some of the things you've observed with your work in the field, what are some of the common pitfalls or challenges that the Valor team see with organizations when building response processes or responding to live incidents?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the preparedness side, and then I'll dive in a little bit to the actually responding to an incident, whether that preparedness took place or did not take place. I think we commonly see organizations adopt templates, pull down templates online, or they take it from a partner company and try to make a template fit into their organization without actually tailoring it to the individuals and the operational intricacies of the organization. So we always urge people to, you can leverage language from template policies, but they need to be very specific to the organization. Or once you get to the actually responding of an incident, it's basically just going to say, my organization responds in this way, but it doesn't have the details needed to kind of operationalize response, which I know we're going to talk about a lot here shortly, but making sure it's operational. And I think that comes along with, once you put the plan in place, make sure you exercise it. If you don't exercise it, you're going to encounter the challenges and these pitfalls that we're going to discuss during the active fire, which is really not the time that you want to do it, because it's going to severely delay the response that's taking place. I think another thing we talked about a little bit, but the skill sets, making sure that the person that you're putting in that seat when it comes to response recognizes that they have that skill set and where they stand in that skill set maturity journey. If they need to go to a course on, public relations or crisis communications, or recovering an IT system that's very important to your business, making sure you kind of understand, where they're at in that skill set and that how you could potentially further it to give you a better chance to respond, I think is a huge one. And then one of the things, we commonly see from a challenge standpoint is just recognizing, knowing what you don't know. A lot of times we see that from a backup standpoint. The IT team comes into the leadership room and says, we have backups. We have, 2 backups, one in AWS, one in Google Cloud. We're good to go. A lot of times a cyber attacker goes after the backups first. So you need to make sure you have cold backups that are offline as well, that are most important to kind of keeping the business up and running from that standpoint. So I think, having a plan, making sure you exercise that plan is a big challenge organizations face today. It sounds simple, but there's some complexities that are not focused on enough when it comes to the importance of the right skill sets, the right tailorized plan, and then testing backups that you have in place to make sure they're ready to go when an incident does take place. And all that kind of surrounds the muscle memory. When we're doing anything in business, whether it's performing a business process or we're, going through a meeting, in order to improve in it, you need to have muscle memory around it so that you know kind of what it feels like, what it looks like, and then who you need to go to get, what resource throughout incident response. And, that's kind of the making sure everybody's bought into the process, making sure there's clear communication. I think open communication is one of the biggest pitfalls and challenges that we see when it comes to cybersecurity incident response. And the reason for that is cybersecurity is complex, and incident response is even more complex because it has so many dynamics associated with it. And a lot of people fear talking about it because they may not fully understand it. But everybody has a unique perspective. If they can bring that unique perspective to the conversation, the whole team, the whole company, the whole supply chain that you operate within is going to be that much better off.
No, that really appreciate those insights in terms of what we're seeing actively out there in the world today. Gives us a little bit more realistic timing in terms of what people are actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis. In addition to, I find a lot of these statistics that we're able to draw on that are validated, there is a bit of a time lag to them. So again, really appreciate those day-to-day observations.
Absolutely.
And it actually brings up like a really good point in terms of that role, capability, and engagement factor with the people that we're drawing upon. So we saw our friend Bill Murray there before saying like you, in other words, like everybody is part of the cybersecurity team as far as practicality of life is concerned. This is not just an individual, this is your problem, not mine. We all have a part to play in this. So something that our team is doing a lot of work in terms of how can we best take advantage of small time availability of a lot of these senior stakeholders in particular when we look at formalized teams. So to your point there earlier around if we're pulling in someone who's now going to be looking after communications, have they got the appropriate skill set and familiarity that's available to them? Do we need to invest in their knowledge and capability? But then how do we continually embed this capability throughout the year so that when that call does come at 9 p.m. on Sunday night on the way home from the football, it isn't this panic and shift gears and warm ourselves up. It's their front and center muscle memory. So something that we've been looking into is around the optimism bias that has appeared to play a pretty big part in risk and resilience in previous years to date. So apologies for a little bit of reading off a screen here, but don't want to miss anything on this for everyone here today. Neuroscience shows that about 80% of the population has a predisposition to optimism bias, leading to an unfounded belief that bad things will not occur to them or to the people around them. This typically reduces the priority placed on risk and resilience preparedness activities. So making sure we're prepared, testing our capabilities above and beyond what's regulated or mandated by the organization or industry that we're in. Something that iluminr looks to do is to overcome this by continually re-engaging the teams and personalities involved in our resilience activities by providing short, lived experiences through 15-minute max. So I want to say maximum there. They don't typically go for longer than that, but they could be as short as 5 minutes. Microsimulations. Using gamification, iluminr microsimulations provide teams with realistic, bite-sized crisis management activities or cyber response or incident response activities, building that risk and awareness capability for the continual evolving landscape. So what we're kind of talking about there is our traditional tabletop approach, which is very powerful and very useful, that we're only able to maybe do once or twice a year with those key individuals. And it's not the whole organization. A 15-minute regular engagement, so monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, depending on the individual within the response structure, we're able to expose more scenarios of a more varied nature. So it's not just that one data breach or one ransomware email. It might actually be a range of activities that are impacting us. To Greg's earlier comment, it could be an internal cyber incident, not necessarily a cyber attack, but just really unsurface those things. So we're pulling away that forefront of, I've been trained on what to do when I get a ransomware email versus our server went down. These are both massive issues with real world impacts for our organization, our people, and our customers. But it's trying to encourage and build that confidence and capability amongst those people within our programs. So what microsimulations look to do is to help develop that muscle memory, continually test and validate the information in our plans, procedures, and supporting materials that are part of our response framework. So again, not just that annual review, but a constant challenging of the information in there, because as our operational landscape is changing on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, so is our risk profile. And then do our plans become out of date? So how do we quickly re-challenge and make sure they're fit for purpose as we move forward? But also increase that engagement without a massive time cost for that engagement increase. So again, regular bite-sized activities. So what I'd like to do here is actually take you all through an example of a microsimulation in real time. So the way, and just making sure, just so I don't run down a rabbit hole and realize that I'm still on the screen, Greg, this is the iluminr showing up now on the screen share capability?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. So a microsimulation, as we've just kind of walked through there, short 10 to 15 minute activity that we look to draw in on a particular element of our response process. So whether that's the initial identification stage. So based on a series of activities or scenarios, let's actually make sure that our escalation approach makes sense. Does our initial incident assessment apply to these different threats that we could be dealing with? Being able to do them in a short time frame. Making sure that, to Greg's earlier point as well, we all actually know our role, and our secondaries and our alternates, do they know their roles? Being able to bring everybody into that concept without needing a 2 to 3 hour all hands meeting once a month. And as we progress through it, actually making sure that we're able to surface really basic fundamental capabilities around, do we know where our plan is? Do we know where the playbook for this particular impact is? How do I find out what I should be doing for my role in this given event? But also continually familiarizing ourselves with the tools that we're looking to our teams to rely upon when we're responding to these incidents. So as we mentioned earlier on in the session, microsimulations are turnkey activities that we're able to deploy out very rapidly amongst one or more teams in our organization.
The world's largest software providers, disrupting the operations of thousands of organizations worldwide. In a press release issued earlier today, the CEO offered his sincere apologies to customers for the ongoing impact, stating, "Our teams are actively..."
So we're able to pull our participants very quickly into real world activities through news articles that are simulated to the scenario. That could be emails, it could be voice calls from different people within the organization, just to really help lift that band-aid, or again, pull them out of BAU. 15 minutes, this is what we're dealing with. This is what I might see on the news. This is what I might be presented with that would make me think, okay, this could be a situation we need to deal with as an organization. Microsimulations within iluminr will actually guide the user through, just to point them into that simple direction so we can take advantage of this short time window. So what is the scenario? In addition to those assets that we can deploy for you and your teams, we're able to include specific information. So for example, for this scenario that we're dealing with today, we're looking at a critical software supplier of ours within the organization being hit by a cyber attack that's now going to impact their ability to service us and our customers over the next couple of days. So for example, we have a confirmed fact here that we've been told that a critical supplier, in this example, it's our friends at Salesforce, has reported a major cyber incident disrupting their critical systems, applications, and operations. Something that we need to validate as an assumption. They're anticipating the disruption to availability of their services for the next 48 hours. So thinking about then, what does this mean for us and our organization, and how is this going to impact us and our teams? So very top level scenario. We're not going into the real big detail like we'd see in a more traditional tabletop of different reports, impacted areas. It's enough to push our participants into the frame of, okay, this is what's going on. Now, what are the fundamental things I need quick access to that we commonly see slowing us down, either in real world response or in those bigger tabletop activities? We're then able to specifically nominate 3 or 4 activities or tasks that that we want our teams or participants to do as part of this micro simulation. And again, we're thinking at fundamental response capabilities. So our first activity that we can see here is we want to actually, based on this scenario at the very top end, what is the assessment of this incident to us and our organization? So what level of response do we need to go through? After completing that, undertake an impact assessment to actually understand what are we concerned about based on the fallout of this particular activity. And last but not least, actually jumping into our response documentation at a bit more granular detail and going, okay, if we did lose Salesforce or Microsoft or whatever the critical application is, do we actually know, and how long does it take us to actually identify what are the business impacts to us? So what processes, what teams, what customers are going to be impacted by this if we are going to be down for the next 48 hours? So if we think about this at a more interconnected resilience concept, that could be validating BI information against our cyber response plans at the same time. So actually starting to pull together different elements of our broader resilience program to make sure that we are prepared effectively. So the system will then again drive us to what we needing to be doing here. So based on this scenario, and I'm just going to be a little bit hyperbolic for the purposes of today's session. An incident assessment within iluminr is designed to empower you and the various people amongst our response framework in the organization, make confident decisions around pulling people out of BAU, making that phone call to the leadership team out of hours to say, we are concerned about this, based on some very simple basic criteria. So the example we're looking at here, that criteria would be the safety and well-being of our employees. Now, depending on the nature of the system, if we've got, if this was a payroll system, that could definitely be like personal information of our staff. So I would be thinking about potential impacts to them. Based on a CRM style system, probably less so in terms of employees. Operational impacts, almost definitely. So if we're not able to access client records or communicate them, depending on, again, what sort of interconnectivity this critical application has with us, and for how long we think this might last. IT and comms, could this have flow-on effects to our broader IT capability? Possibly. Reputational fallout. Again, do we actually understand the level of customer data within these platforms? Is that information surfaced across the whole team? An example I've seen this being used quite interesting in the last couple of months is the operations lead said, yes, definitely, because it's got all of our customer records in there. However, the other people in the team weren't aware as to the depth of those records and thought that was in a different system internally or like an on-prem sort of thing. So if we think about education and capability of our teams, by doing these little 10, 15-minute micro simulations once a month, once every 2 months, once a quarter, again, depending on, and with more people, we're able to surface the criticality and priority of different areas of the business being impacted and what that means for us. So not trying to create panic, but confident awareness that if that call does come through at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night, we know, oh, it's Salesforce. Okay, yeah, I've got to drop what I'm doing because this needs attention or we're going to be in trouble. And we can see here, as we populate this initial assessment, we've got a suggested course of action. I do like to point out to those that are observing this from a new perspective, we're able to tailor all the questions in this assessment and the wording for the response outcomes that are relevant to you, your organization, and your teams. So all the language that we're using in the platform is relevant to you and your organization, just to make this as simple as possible. Because again, we are expecting this from a real world use or a continual training perspective to happen at funky hours of the day. We don't expect it to be that one coffee down, it's 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. and we're all prepared for that next incident. It's they come out when you least expect them. After I've completed that activity, I'm able to actually mark it and comment into the platform, so I can actually capture what's been done here. So I've completed this one, and if I wanted to, I just need to get back into my taskboard. I can actually put a comment around who assessed it at what time, and that's all being captured by the platform. But I can also proactively ask people to actually say, okay, what did you assess it as? So here I'm actually going to comment, assessed as level 3, require cyber incident response team activation. Next, in this particular activity, we're then starting to think about impact assessments. So thinking about, okay, based on a Salesforce outage, how concerned are we about the broader impacts to the organization? Now, in terms of who carries these out at a team by team level, this really depends on the maturity stage in the journey amongst you and your users and people across the organization. We're seeing one of two main approaches to this come out at the moment. Single player approach. So we're actually looking to target key individuals and individual staff members and their broader knowledge within our response framework, or a bit more of a multiplayer approach where we're saying, okay, as a team, so Greg and myself are here dealing with this one today with a few people observing. What are the impacts we're concerned about for this particular incident? Before we start working through this example, I'm actually just going to put a little bit of a poll question out to everybody as well, in terms of what scares you most about a potential cyber attack for your organization. So have a look at this and keen to see what everyone's broader concerns are. But from a response perspective and what we try to drive people through with iluminr, if we're dealing with a particular incident, what are the impact severities at different points in time throughout the response to help us focus our efforts on them? So Greg, keen on your thoughts. If we're thinking about the loss of our major CRM platform that we've got minimal control over how it's actually being managed at a vendor perspective, what are we starting to think about in terms of people impacts, finance, compliance, where that might start to sit in this sort of an example?
Yeah, Leon, first of all, love what you guys are doing to harness technology. A lot of times we see these different elements of incident response in a Word document or in an Excel sheet, and everybody has a different version. So it never really comes together. And I love that it provides kind of that single pane of glass throughout response. One of the things to mention that we didn't mention earlier about the planning process is making sure you've pre-agreed on what systems are what priority for the organization from an operational standpoint. Obviously, we know Salesforce is a big system for a lot of organizations. It all starts with onboarding the vendor. So when you're going out to the market and saying, we need a Salesforce-like tool, asking Salesforce these questions, if we have an incident, that is impacted by something that is going on in your organization, how are you going to communicate with us? What do you expect from our organization? So kind of sorting out that shared responsibility, and then that responsibility matrix can help you to really have an accurate pinpoint on what the impact's going to be to your organization and what they're responsible for and what their impact's going to be, so that you can kind of calculate these in a more accurate fashion, as opposed to saying everybody's stressed out, everybody is heads on fire, everything's a severe impact. And that doesn't allow you to make an informed decision, which you have to be able to make in scenarios like these.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely that element. And again, something that we're seeing as a bit of a resilience champion benefit to a well thought out microsimulation program for you and your teams is, in addition to the role-based, system-based, and that team capability base, is that constant challenge of those plans, procedures, and criticalities that we've pre-agreed. And I'll show you an example in just a moment when we're talking through capturing participant engagement or getting them to more continuously contribute to our program, is little surveys at the end of activity that it might be looking at, okay, based on this scenario, what's your biggest concern in terms of internal systems that might be impacted? The resilience champion then being able to gather all that information from the 2, 3, 4, 5 teams that we've rolled this 15-minute activity out to, and going, okay, this was focused on Salesforce, but everyone's now freaking out about email, or everyone's concerned about our voice system, or things like that. Just being able to continually challenge that information that we commonly spend reviewing on an annual basis. Let's do it a bit more regularly based on a variety of scenarios, not just the one that we used when we're looking to validate that information. And when we, again, capture this, everything in the iluminr platform is actually being logged and timestamped, and we have the ability to export this information at either a real live response post-incident review perspective, or again, from a microsimulation perspective, in terms of, do all of our participants and teams and people we've allocated to these roles truly understand And are they assessing it in the same way? Do we need to realign everybody? Is our risk framework that we use to measure impact correct or out of date? Do we need to validate that as it's kind of coming forward?
Leon, you hit on a key point there. We all need specificity and relevance to the business in order to really resonate with something, and that creates context. And in business, we all need context to really buy in and find the right actions to take. So I think that's an extremely powerful aspect of the platform and the approach you guys are taking here.
Thank you. And we have a comment from David, one of our attendees today, in terms of pointing out the importance of application inventory, details like company contact information, vendor contact, internal procurement contact, insurance contacts, all that information. An example we see commonly as a particular task in here might be, okay, one of these tasks might be looking at, okay, do we actually have our key point of contact for this system or our top 10 systems criticality wise in our organization? And making sure we're able to readily access them as required. So again, from an iluminr response capability perspective, we're able to capture that information in a custom document library, or we can direct it to a vendor management ERP system that you're using as well internally. But again, actually drilling down to in our common tabletops, we do, at least back in my consulting days, I did observe a lot of, oh yeah, we'll go to the procurement team and we'll get the person's contact information. And it kind of stops there because we're doing a lot more other stuff in that activity. Let's actually confirm we can get that information and let's comment it in the activity and then actually go back to the vendor in a time of peace and say, is Greg still our contact? Is Leon still our contact? And they're, oh no, they left like 6 months ago. So it's like, let's actually make sure this information is relevant and up to date as we're moving forward. As we complete these activities, we're then able to close out the simulation in the platform and actually build in a couple of really basic feedback questionnaires that again are tailorable at a client or team-based level. But to be able to measure things like, again, if we're looking to bring in more people to our cyber response capability, what was their confidence level beforehand? What was it like after the activity? What would we actually like them to see, or what is their perspective? And that nice, like, safe space environment, it's just into web form. I'd like to see more training. I'd like to see more activities. I'd like to see more awareness at a broader staffing level. We've identified that we didn't have a recovery plan for this application. Let's make sure we've got it in play from a communication or business transfer perspective. But also bringing them along your program journey of that capability uplift to say, okay, we know what we need to achieve from a fundamental perspective, but if we know we're going to get more of our stakeholders' time, if we're doing a bit more on the ransomware focus or the third-party focus or supply chain focus, it's all about leaning into what's going to get their attention and capitalize on their attention at that point in time from a short time-based perspective. Not that we want to get everyone together for 3 to 6 hours once or twice a year. We really want to bring them in every few minutes, every couple of weeks, every couple of months to make sure that it is constantly front and center as time goes on. I'm conscious of time. It's always great to actually talk around how these things can kind of play out. Do want to point out there's a code on the screen at the moment. If you're interested in terms of how cyber fundamental microsimulations could support you and your organization, please do take a screenshot or bring up your phone to just capture that, and you can arrange a time to speak with one of us. We do have a question here actually in terms of, from our friend Donna here, how long does it take to build a microsimulation on average, given tabletops, group of 6 of us meeting weekly, an hour or 2? So great question, Donna. From an iluminr microsimulation perspective, we actually have a library of templates ready to go for you and your teams that we can deploy into an iluminr instance for you that then just require a couple of minutes of tweaking in terms of, like the example we used earlier today, in terms of a critical system, making sure that it's a system that you guys actually use. If we're talking a bit broader in terms of different operational impacts, so if we're looking to do more general training across the orgs, like different business leads that aren't necessarily leading technical recovery, making sure that it is a scenario that's relevant to them. So things like ransomware or threatening emails, things like that, not just the broader, like not every business lead has a responsibility to call the vendor. That's more that strategic operational level. When we're talking about broader organizational recovery, it could be things like who in your team or in your organization do you need to go to for these things? So little minor tweaks. But again, we're able to have like a library of say 6 or so activities ready for you within a matter of weeks or so, in terms of we have these templates ready to go. Once your platform's configured and implemented, we can deploy them, and then it's up to you in terms of when we want to bring people into. So we're able to reduce that admin time that you and your immediate team generally focus in on to ensure that you're able to focus more on that. How do we get to the next level? Let's actually look at all this data as we've kind of moved forward. Something else that I do like to just put a point out in terms of other things going on in the iluminr landscape. We do have the upcoming Big Resilience Reset webinar on the 6th and 7th of December. There you will see the QR code on your screen that will have a link for you there. This is also on our website, and I believe there will be an email coming out summarizing today's activities for you there as well. And very, very importantly, I do want to acknowledge Greg and the team at Valor's time in the lead up to today's discussion, and also your valued contribution today. You can learn more about the services that Valor advises and how they assist from a response capability and preparedness perspective. The code on the screen will take you to their website, and Greg and the team would love to speak to you about how they could help you moving forward. Again, I am conscious this is typical Leon fashion when I'm talking about something I'm very passionate about, going a few minutes over. Happy to stay on for a few minutes to answer any questions. I do have a few in there. So another one we've got here is, do we warn people? So this is a planned activity, then alert them in terms of joining the simulation, or is it unplanned? Again, David, excellent question. All about what's relevant for you and your teams. Currently, we do see the majority of our customers doing a bit of a preparation activity, especially because it's a new concept. So that would be like a short 10-15 minute information session about this is how we do it. You can jump in, practice with it a little bit, and then we actually schedule the 10-15 minute actual micro sims. So it's sitting in their diaries, so they do know when it's going to happen. But you do, because they are shorter in time frame, if your teams or what you're looking to validate is like availability of people is a great example, definitely doing them as surprise. But we do commonly find at least doing the first 2 or 3 fundamental ones in terms of that planned activity, just to get people comfortable with the process, then opening it up to a bit more of a, are we able to do them together as a team or individually? Do we schedule a session, or do we say, okay, 9 a.m. Monday morning, this microsimulation 4 is ready for you. Please complete it by Friday. And it's up to the team or the individual to make that time for that 10-15 minute activity to actually get it done. Another question in terms of, are they meant to be done solo or a group setting? Excellent concept. We do see both activities in terms of how these are being rolled out. So again, depending on where your teams are at from a capability or maturity perspective, or if it's new plans, is it new stakeholders from there? So we do see at the moment, especially when it's the first time we're introducing micro simulations to you and your teams, the multiplayer approach. So very much in that group setting. So it's still, this is our team, this is our cohort, this is who we're going to be relying upon when we're dealing with these live events, but working together in terms of the tasks might be unallocated, and it's up to the team to determine who in the team is going to carry out those activities. So kind of leading back to Greg's comment in terms of roles and capability. Do we have the right people in there? Is the leader the right person for this team? Or we have the ability to preset in the activities who we want to carry it out, but the team can do it together. Because again, we do know from real world that these things don't happen Monday to Friday at 9 to 5. It could be the weekend, and it could just be Leon and Greg coming online and the other 6 people just aren't answering their phone. So we're going to have to be wearing a few hats as we deal with it as it goes forward. So we're able to facilitate both, but we do find that group setting to start off with, especially for these fundamental activities, as the initial approach. And as your team becomes more comfortable with the process and we're able to start challenging them with more and more technical or complex details, we'd start moving into that single player journey as well. Just an interesting point of note before we start calling it a day, the poll in terms of what people are most concerned about if a cyber attack impacted their organization, 60% concerned with data loss, We've got a tie in terms of 18%, reputational damage or loss of service capability, and a wee 6% in terms of concerns around monetary loss. So again, we think about data, reputation, and ability to service and continue operating from like a business continuity perspective from a resulting cyber impact. Definitely the common trend. So how do we continue to make sure that we've got the right information available? Have we got the right controls in place? Does everyone know what to do when we are faced with these situations? I've spoken a lot for the last 15 minutes. Again, Greg, thank you so much for joining me today, and everyone else who's made the time to join us, again, depending where you're dialing in from. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening.
Leon, thanks so much for the time. Audience, thanks so much for participating. Something to keep in mind going forward is, you can be proactive, which will, prevent you from having to be reactive. It's much more costly on the reactive side. So stay safe, stay secure out there. And we love what you guys are doing at iluminr, and looking forward to continuing to collaborate, Leon. Thanks so much.
Likewise, Greg. All the best. Everybody, hope you have a lovely day. And to my fellow people in Colorado, I hope the snow is not boxing you in and we enjoy a nice little early tease of winter. Speak to you all soon.